Hi everyone, this is Callie. Thanks so much for being here today. Today's card is a part of the Simon Says Stamp Sweetheart Release blog hop, and I'm excited to share my card today. It is a 5x7 card, and it features this set called Friendship Leafy Cluster. And it comes with a stamp set. It's a 4x6-inch stamp set with coordinating dies as well as some coordinating stencils. The stencils are a 2-pack, and you have overlapping foliage that's really pretty. So let's get started here on creating my card for today. I'm creating on a whim, so whatever it is I'm doing for the first time. I don't practice or create a prototype or plan out my cards in any way except in my head. So I have some flannel ink here. It's a really light gray. I wanted my background to be kind of subtle, so I am putting these large clusters of leaves onto some acrylic blocks, and I'm just going to stamp at random all over to create a frame for this foliage. So again, I'm stamping with a really light gray, and I'm going all around the panel, and I started at the bottom right hand corner. I'm just going to work my way around until I get to the bottom again, and then I'll stamp this last one here. So as you can see, there's some white space in the center, and that's because in my head I wanted to create a frame that's going to feature these two main stems here that I'm going to emboss in gold embossing powder. Unlike my background, which I stamped with a gray ink for a more subtle look, I'm going to highlight these stems with some gold embossing powder. So I've stamped with clear embossing ink, and now I'm going to use some gold embossing powder and scatter that over the stamped image, and then I'm going to heat set that, and that's really going to bring out these stems. Now you can do it in black, you can do it in silver, whatever tones you like. I'm going for a gold look today. Okay, so now that everything is stamped and prepared, I'm going to use a stamp and stencil mat here to hold my card panels down while I ink blend and add color to these leafy clusters. As mentioned, there are 2 layers to these stencils, so you can create leaf clusters in multiple colors if you'd like. I'm using the same colors for both layers. I'm using some pine ink as well as sage ink, and then to give my leaves a little bit more color, I'm going to be adding in some melon, an orangey color. So for the first layer, I'm adding a single layer of that sage lighter green color, and then I'll go in with some orange and just barely catch the tips and some sides of these leaves. It doesn't have to be all of them. Here and there, I do skip a leaf just to create more color and variety in the foliage. We have so many of them for our background as well as these 2 main stems. For the final layer of ink, I'm using some pine ink. This is the darker of the trio that I'm using for the greens, and I'm just going to ink blend towards the center of the foliage stem. So when I lift this away, you're going to see more impactfully what those colors look like together. And since the smaller stem is on there too, I'm going to go ahead and work on that. So I'll work on one stencil at a time, big then small, and then move on to the second stencil set and repeat that process. So I'll quickly share here one more time what I do for each layer, and then I'll fast forward through the rest since all of the ink blending is very similar. First, I do a single layer of the sage color, which is the lighter green. Then I go in with some orange and catch the tips and sides wherever I want them at random. And then I will go in with the darker color towards the center of the stem. Again, I repeat this process on the smaller cluster as well. And now that I'm done ink blending these stems, you can see how the orange really adds to the leaf clusters, and that light really catches the gold from the embossing. Okay, so now that we have the main 2 leaf clusters done, I'm going to work on the background. There's a lot more room for error here since I am stenciling a whole panel that's a 5x7 size. So I'm going to be really careful, but I'm repeating that same process, working on the large foliage of the first stencil and then the smaller, and then switching to the second stencil to complete an entire frame. Isn't this pretty? I was so pleased with the results when I pulled away that stencil. So now to create a frame for the inside, I'm using a stitched rectangle. I've die cut a smaller one just to create a frame or a mat around that border that we created for the background. And I don't want to cover too much of it up because it's so pretty. But to give my frame a bit more interest, I'm going to use some gold embossing powder again. So I'm using my clear embossing pad, and I'm just applying the ink to the edges of the paper. And then I'm going to use embossing powder to Give my frame a bit more color and pizzazz. Now, if you have a really good gold marker, you can definitely outline your frame with a marker. I like the embossed raised edges, so I thought that was a better option for this particular card, but a gold outline will work really well too. I've added 2 more layers of cardstock to the back of my frame just to give my card a bit more sturdiness at its core and also to raise my frame up just a tad. And then I used my T-ruler to make sure that everything is nice and centered before I set it aside to dry. I've die cut my 2 main gold leafy clusters here, and I've positioned them where I think I want them to go. Now I'm cutting some 3D foam squares so that they fit on the stems at the center only, so that it catches the white part of the frame and not our background at all, because remember we lifted that frame up with 2 additional card panels, so I didn't want the foam adhesive to be on 2 different levels, if that makes sense. Finally, here I'm going to finish up with sentiments, and we are going to emboss some sentiments over black cardstock with white embossing powder. This is my favorite thing to do, of course, with sentiments, is embossing them in white over black cardstock. I just love the contrast and where it draws the eye on the card, so the black really stands out. Then before I die cut my sentiment there, I am just buffing off that extra clay residue that is on there from the embossing powder tool. Then, because I'm a little silly, I'm going to try to match the height of the sentiment to the leaf clusters that are there. So I'm using very thin strips of foam tape behind the word friendship where it overhangs that leafy cluster at the bottom. And then I'll attach my sub-sentiment as well at the top. And now to finish my whole entire project out, I'm going to repeat the outlining of the gold embossing powder so that our outer frame coordinates with that inner frame too. I think this card would be really pretty with additional colors to it, and then you can also add jewels if you'd like. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you're interested in the products that I use, be sure to check out the links below as well as on the coordinating blog post where everything will be listed for your convenience. Thank you so much for stopping by and have a wonderful day. Bye everyone!